In the spring of 1968, Elvis Presley sat across from a man he had never met and asked him a question that nobody in his life was willing to answer honestly. What do you think of my career? The man's name was Steve Binder. He was 35 years old, a television director who had made a name for himself in music production. The Tammy Show, Hullabaloo, a controversial special with Petula Clark that had nearly ended his career in Hollywood before it began. He was not an Elvis fan. He had not grown up listening to Elvis the way the rest of America had. When he had been asked to direct a television special for the biggest star in the country, his first instinct had been to say no. He said yes. And now he was in his office in Los Angeles with Elvis Presley sitting across from him, and Elvis Presley was asking him what he thought of his career. Binder answered honestly. He said, "I think it's in the toilet." In the years that followed, Binder described what happened next. Elvis Presley, 32 years old, the king of rock and roll, the most famous entertainer in America, looked at him and said, "Well, finally, somebody's talking straight with me." That exchange took place in a small office in Los Angeles. But what it set in motion would become one of the most important moments in the history of American television. Because what happened in the weeks that followed, the battles, the dressing room sessions, the fight over a single song, would take a man who had been slowly disappearing from the culture that had created him and put him back at the center of everything. This is the story of how that happened, and the man who made it possible. To understand why those words mattered so much to Elvis Presley in 1968, you have to understand where he had been for the previous 7 years. In 1961, Colonel Tom Parker had made a calculation. Live performing was unpredictable. Films were controlled. Parker steered Elvis toward Hollywood, and for the next 7 years, that is where Elvis stayed. 31 films. Formulaic plots, soundtracks full of songs written for the movies rather than for the music. Elvis had described some of these films himself, in private, with words he would not have used on camera. By 1968, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones had moved into the space that Elvis had opened. They were doing what he had done, pushing boundaries, making music that felt urgent and true. Elvis was making movies about speedboats. The chart positions were declining. The question, which nobody in his inner circle was willing to ask out loud, was whether he had waited too long. If this is the kind of story you come to this channel for, the moments that changed everything, the honest conversations that the history books leave out, please subscribe. There are more of these. We are committed to telling them properly. The meeting between Elvis Presley and Steve Binder lasted approximately 1 hour. In that hour, something happened that had not happened to Elvis Presley in a very long time. He talked to someone who was not managing him. Binder asked him, "What do you think would happen if you walked out onto Sunset Boulevard right now?" Elvis said he didn't know. Binder told him, "Nothing. Nobody is going to tear your clothes off. Nobody is going to chase you. The world has moved on. That is the problem, and that is what we have to fix." Elvis heard this not as an insult, but as a diagnosis. Binder was the first person to say directly, "The machinery is slowing down, and here is what we are going to do about it." Elvis told him what he wanted. He wanted to make records that he believed in. He wanted to perform music the way he had performed it before the movies, honestly, without a script, with the sense that something real was at stake. Binder told him, "Then do that. I will put pictures to it." When Elvis went home that evening, he told Priscilla what had happened. He said, "I don't care what the colonel says. I have a gut feeling about this guy Binder. I am going with him." Priscilla told Binder this story years after Elvis had died. Binder had spent the entire production wondering why he had never been fired. This was the answer.
I understand.
Colonel Tom Parker's vision for the NBC special was straightforward. Elvis would sing 20 Christmas songs. There would be no talking between numbers. It would be packaged, clean, safe. The kind of holiday special that Perry Como or Andy Williams might deliver. Binder had a different idea. He wanted to strip everything away. He wanted Elvis in a simple setting, performing the music that had made him, the gospel, the rock and roll, the blues, the country, in a way that was as close to unfiltered as a television production could be. The conflict between these two visions ran through every day of production. Parker pushed back on almost every decision. The informal acoustic sessions that Binder wanted to film, Parker opposed. The production numbers that carried emotional weight rather than commercial appeal, Parker opposed those too. When Elvis, in a meeting with the Colonel, sat and nodded and appeared to agree with everything Parker said, Binder felt the production slipping away. Then Elvis and Binder walked out of the meeting together. Elvis jabbed Binder in the ribs and said 3 words that told him everything he needed to know about where Elvis actually stood. He said, "Forget the Colonel." The production moved forward. Elvis Presley had moved into NBC studios. He showed up for rehearsals and stayed. He slept in the dressing room. Every evening, after the official rehearsals ended and the production staff went home, something happened in that dressing room. Elvis and his original musicians, Scotty Moore on guitar, DJ Fontana on drums, would sit down together and play. Not for the special, not for the cameras. They played because the music was in them and the room was quiet enough to let it out. Steve Binder started walking past the dressing room in the evenings. He would stop and listen through the door. What he heard was better than anything happening on the official production. He went back to the production office and said, "I have to film this." Parker said no. What was happening in that room was Elvis Presley without management, without image control, and that was the one thing Parker had always worked hardest to prevent. Binder found a way. The sessions moved to the stage, the moment that would become the most celebrated part of the entire special. Elvis, in a small arena configuration, in black leather, leaning into the microphone with the freedom of someone who has been given back something that was taken from him, was born from those evenings through a closed door. Parker's final demand was this. The special had to end with a Christmas song, something commercial, something that could be released as a single during the holiday season. Binder had other ideas. In the weeks they had spent together at NBC, Elvis had talked to Binder about what was happening in America in 1968. Martin Luther King Jr. had been shot in Memphis in April. Robert Kennedy had been shot in Los Angeles in June. Elvis said to Binder, "I want to do something that means something. I want to say something real." Binder went to his musical director, Earl Brown, and asked him to write a song. Not a Christmas song. Something that carried what Elvis was feeling, the grief and the hope and the specific American hunger for something better than what the year had delivered. Brown wrote, "If I Can Dream." Parker heard it and rejected it. The argument that followed lasted through the final days of production. Elvis sang "If I Can Dream" to close the special. When the backup vocalists heard the finished take, they were in tears. The special aired on December 3rd, 1968. It was the #1 show on American television that week, a 42% share of the audience. The special aired, and Elvis watched it in a projection room with Steve Binder, just the two of them. When it was over, Elvis said, "I never again want to record a song I don't believe in, or make a movie where I don't like the script." He meant it. The sessions at American Sound Studio in Memphis in January of 1969, the ones that produced In the Ghetto and Suspicious Minds, happened directly because of the momentum the special had created. The Las Vegas residency that followed, the return to live performing, the recognition that Elvis Presley was not a nostalgia act but a living, working artist of the first order, all of it flowed from those weeks at NBC in the summer of 1968. Binder and Elvis never worked together again. After the special, Elvis gave Binder a phone number where he could be reached. When Binder called it, the line was wrong. The Colonel's people intercepted everything else. Binder did not speak to Elvis again before Elvis died in August of 1977. Years later, Binder went to Las Vegas and watched Elvis perform. He said at the first show, Elvis was fantastic, fully present, fully alive, everything the special had promised. He went back a few years later. He said, "I knew instantly it was all over." What Steve Binder told Elvis Presley in that Los Angeles office in 1968 was the truth. Nobody else in Elvis's life was willing to say it. Nobody else had the position outside the system to say it without consequence. "I think it is in the toilet." Well, finally, somebody's talking straight with me. Those 8 words changed everything. Not the special itself, the honesty that made the special possible. One man willing to say what he saw. One man willing to hear it. If this is the kind of Elvis history you want to keep watching, subscribe to the channel. There are more moments, more people, and more untold stories still to document. And if I Can Dream has ever meant something to you, if you remember the first time you heard it, what it did, leave it in the comments. We want to hear it.